Okay, this is sample number 43 for Fashion 100, Sewing for Fashion Design 1. This is sewing on buttons. I have three types of buttons on the table here. I've got the 2-hole, the 4-hole, and the shank. We're going to begin by sewing the 2-hole. We're going to thread up a needle and thread, and I'm also going to knot it at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead, put a little spit on my finger, take my thread ends, bring them together, wrap them around my finger, twist, and pull it. And I now have a knot on the end of my thread. We're going to begin by sewing the 2-hole button on, and we're going to be doing a thread shank. So we're going to be making what essentially is this protruding area on our thread in order to give the button a little extra space. The more thickness it's trying to button through, the longer the shank needs to be. And it is possible on a leather jacket to see a thread shank of 1/4 or 3/8 inch long. To help us complete the shank, we're going to be using a straight pin. So I'm going to begin by hiding my knot. This is typically done between the layers, coming up where you want your button. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go through one of the holes on my button and then through the other hole. I'm going to go ahead, bring the needle down and across. I'm not going to pull that thread super tight. I want to leave a little bit of breathing space. And then I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to pin it in there. It's giving me just a bare minimum of space in order to manage that shank on the underside. If you're in the fabric store, there are things that can help you do the shank as well, little implements. I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing around through my button, coming up through one side and going down through the other and catching the fabric. Always making sure that the pin is maintained in the center. Continuing on, 3 or 4 stitches in most cases does a good job. You can give it more. There we go. I've got 3 or 4 stitches. I'm now going to remove that pin. Now you can see that there's a little bit of a thread bubble going on there. I'm going to take my thread underneath and wrap it once or twice around the bottom. This is creating that shank. Then I'm going to go ahead, underneath the button, take a little baby stitch, wrap my thread around the baby stitch, pull it down, and that knots it. That completes this button. Trim your threads. Now we're going to continue with a 4-hole. Same procedure. Knot the thread. I'm going to start by hiding my knot. You can also hide knots directly under the button. So I'm going to take a little baby stitch right there, pull it through. Button goes on top. I'm going to begin by taking my button and going through 2 of the holes. Now, you can do different patterns on 4-hole buttons. You can do little crosses, you can do 2 little parallel lines. I'm going to do the 2 little parallel lines. Before I go any further, I've done my first stitch. I'm going to get that pin and get it underneath. There it goes. Now I'm going to continue stitching my button, going through just like I did on the 2-hole. 3 or 4 stitches usually does the job. And the more stitches you start to get in there, the stabler this will become to handle. Okay, last stitch. And now I'm going to proceed over to the opposite side and start up through the second set of holes. I am maintaining that pin. Okay, I've now got my 2 parallel lines. I'm going to remove that pin. You can see how much that pin is raising that particular set of thread loops. I'm going to go ahead and go around a couple of times to create my shank. I'm going to go ahead, take a stitch, knot off my thread. And this button is complete. Last button is going to be the shank button. Got a needle and thread. I'm going to go ahead and knot it off. I've got a tail on my thread. I'm just going to clip that excess tail. Gone. Don't need to create a shank on this because the button already has it. I'm going to go ahead, find a position, and start my button. Going to anchor it, go through my shank hole, and then come through and start sewing my button. Through as many times as you feel it's necessary. There it is. I've now completed my shank button. I'm going to go ahead, knot off my thread, and it's complete. Thread should always match the garment. Clip and complete.